I want to switch now to give you a better idea of what the program looks like, right? Once you're in the program, you're taking these courses and you're going to be, well, you're going to have to look at me and hear my voice for quite a long time. And we're going to go through the doctrine from start to finish in each subject, right? So with contracts, we start with contract formation. We're then going to cover alternative theories of liability, restitution, promissory estoppel. What do you do if you don't form a contract? Then we're going to look at things like the meaning of the contract. Does it have to be in writing? Is it enforceable? What do the terms mean? Are there any terms that we're going to imply into the contract, even if they're not written down? We're going to cover defenses, right? What if there's duress? What if somebody lied when they were making the contract? What if there's fraud? And then we're going to cover damages. That's a big topic. That's what the client really cares about. How much money will I get if they don't do what they're supposed to do? And I guess importantly, breach as well. Do I still need to perform, right? They're not doing what they're supposed to do. So can I stop performing under the contract or not, right? So we're going to cover all of those topics in the course. And I thought we would start here towards the beginning. I say towards the beginning because really the first thing we cover in contracts, a bunch of background on sort of where does the law come from and all of that. And long story short, it is common law, right? I know that that is a different system. That we have the English system, right, that we inherited from Great Britain. And so it's a common law system, meaning that there is no code of contracts that governs most transactions. We'll see that there is a code that governs the sale of goods, some transactions, but for the most part, there is not a code governing most contracts for the sale of land, for work, services, those types of things. And so we need to look at the cases to pull rules out for our course to understand exactly what the rule statements, the black letter statements are that you would need for the bar exam. Luckily, of course, people have done that. They pulled those rules out of the cases. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can look at things like the restatement. We can look at those bar preparation materials and so forth, and we can pull out clear rules like this, right? Even though it's common law, we still can pull out rules as though it were a code. So basically, what I'm trying to say here is, even though there's not a statute I can point to, I can give you these rule statements that you would need to memorize. So formation has two things: agreement and consideration. You need an offer and an acceptance. That's our mutual assent or agreement, right? I'll buy your car for $500. Yes, I'll sell my car. That's an acceptance, right? For $500. Offer and acceptance. Consideration is something else. We're gonna, I think offer and acceptance, we all have a general idea of what that looks like. They agree on a deal. But what is this consideration, this other requirement? Well, it's required in the US and English law. It's actually not required everywhere. Consider the idea behind consideration is that we want to make a contract enforceable at law, but not a promise to make a gift. The whole role of consideration is distinguishing a legal agreement, a deal, from a promise to give a gift. And that is because a promise to give something in the future is not enforceable in the US system, generally. Sometimes, if there's reliance or something like that, we could get liability, but it will not be called a contract. It'll be called estoppel, something we're going to cover later in the course. But it's important to distinguish between those two things, estoppel and a contract, because it's going to have a lot of implications for damages. So a promise to give a gift is not enforceable. Why is that? Why is that so important to the British system, to the American system, to the English system? Well, there is this idea in our system that, well, a promise to give a gift is never seen as serious, or at least not serious enough that they can drag you into court and sue you if you don't follow through. We tend to think that people, well, they're promising to give gifts out of generosity, right? They feel as though they're trying to convey a benefit to someone, but they might change their minds. Maybe they were in a really good mood, their mood changes. Maybe the facts change, right? They're ungrateful to you, they're mean to you, they do something that is offensive to you or your family or your, whatever it is, and you change your mind. Or maybe your circumstances change. You promise to give someone some expensive gift, but then you lose a bunch of money or you get fired from your job. Most people would think, okay, yeah, you promised to give me this expensive thing, but then you got fired or you lost your retirement savings. You don't have to give it to me now. And so a promise to make a gift is not enforceable. Another way of looking at this is charitable contributions. This is where a lot of the doctrine was. A lot of the cases are about promises from wealthy donors to give to charities. And the courts generally say, unless you create a legal vehicle for it that is formal, like a contract or some other vehicle, then it's not enforceable. It's not enforceable at law, just a promise to give a gift, because otherwise we're scared that maybe people will stop making those promises, right? If you have Elon Musk, the richest guy in the world, promising to give a huge amount of money, and then he ends up getting sued if he changes his mind, well, then next time he's never going to say it. He's not going to say the promise, or he's going to be more reluctant to. And so the idea is that by requiring consideration, we are encouraging people to give to charity, make those promises, knowing that they're not going to get sued over them. Okay, so we need to distinguish between a promise to make a gift and a deal. How do we do that? Well, there are two elements. There's a benefit or a detriment. Someone needs to get something or be hurt. And we need to find a bargain. We need to find mutual inducement. The promise must induce the benefit or detriment, or the detriment or benefit must induce the promise. That's our basic rule. And so the key things for you to remember, if you were writing an essay, you would want to write this rule down. Key things are that benefit or detriment and the bargain. So let's go through a case as an example, because I bet that rule sounded fairly abstract and maybe didn't make a lot of sense the first time you hear it. So let's apply it in a concrete example. First case here is Hammer versus Sidway. This is a famous case. It's in every contracts textbook. Pretty much anyone who's ever taken a U.S. contracts course has seen this case. So in this case, we have a rich uncle, and he has a big dinner party. There's a lot of people there, and his nephew is there. He tells his nephew, who is a teenager at this point in time, that, he will pay him $5,000. And this is an old case. So $5,000 is a lot of money to this kid, right? It's probably like $100,000 to us today. He will pay him $5,000 if he will refrain from drinking, smoking, gambling, and swearing until he becomes 21 years old, right? So he wants the nephew to stay out of trouble, and he's promising to pay him if he's able to do that. Again, pretty sizable amount of money. The nephew, and this is in front of a big group of people, right? It's a big dinner party. He makes a big deal about it. Everybody sees it. There's no dispute that he said this. The nephew then follows through. He does not drink or smoke or gamble or anything until he turns 21. He then tells the uncle, hey, I did it. I didn't drink. I didn't gamble. I'm now 21. And so can I have the money, please? The nephew says, I'm worried you're going to waste it. You're too young. You're not responsible. So I'm going to set this money aside for you. And when you are ready to start your life in a serious way, I will give it to you. However, the uncle then dies before he ever actually gives the money to the nephew. And of course, the family says, no, nephew, you shouldn't get the money. The estate, after he passes away, goes to the cousin, not our nephew here. And so the other family member doesn't want to pay the nephew. And so our question then is, was this a promise to confer a gift, not enforceable, or was it a contract? When you just look at this, it may not look like a contract, right? It's an uncle making a promise to a nephew, family relationship, and it's a promise for money, but the nephew isn't doing anything that benefits the uncle. You might think this is a gift, but when we apply our rule, the court says, no, it's a contract. This is a contract. Remember, we need that benefit or detriment and a bargain. So, benefit or detriment, let's start there. Anytime you get a rule like this, you want to break it down into elements and apply each part separately in a logical way, being as clear as you can. So, benefit or detriment. Well, the uncle promised to pay the nephew $5,000. So we're looking at the uncle as the promisor. He's making the promise. And so the uncle needs to either get a benefit or the nephew needs to suffer a detriment. The uncle did not get a benefit, right? Now you might think he got he got nothing in return, right? The nephew didn't give him anything of value. You might think the uncle got the benefit of feeling good about himself, of, being happy that his nephew stayed out of trouble, but the courts do not consider that consideration. That does not count. So the uncle got no benefit. Then we need to ask, okay, so what about the detriment? Detriment being a limitation or disability on the promisee. The promisee is the recipient of the promise. So uncle is promising to give nephew money, so nephew is the promisee. Did the nephew suffer a detriment? The court says yes. He gave up the right to drink and smoke. That's something he otherwise could have done. That is a detriment. So that's something he gave up that he otherwise had a legal right to do. Now, the estate tries to argue that's not really a hardship. It wasn't bad for the nephew. He's better off not drinking, smoking, and gambling. But the court says we're not asking, was he hurt? No, we're asking, did he give up something that he had a legal right to do? That is sufficient. We don't ask, was this a good deal? We don't ask, did it benefit him? We're just asking, was it an honest deal? So we do have that detriment to the nephew. The nephew got the money, but only if he gave up the right to drink and smoke. So is that a bargain? Well, the bargain means that the party was induced to do the thing by the promise, right? So sometimes it's an exchange of promises, sometimes it's a performance. Here, the nephew didn't promise to do anything. He just did it, right? He did not drink or smoke. But the reason he did that was because of the promise, right? And the uncle promised only because he wanted the nephew to stop drinking and smoking, right? There's a causal connection between these two things. They're inducing each other. They're connected logically. That's what we're looking for in the bargain, right? If there's not a bargain, they're going to be unconnected things with no relationship. But instead, what we have is this because statement. That is our bargain. Uncle is promising to pay only because nephew is going to stop drinking and smoking. Nephew is stopping to drink and smoke only because he wants the money, right? That's the story you need to be able to tell to have consideration, at least that bargain element. So that's our case. And of course, in the class, we cover a number of cases. We cover a few different cases that go through those two basic elements of consideration. Actually, just one more, but it's a longer case. And then we cover a number of cases on what I call sub-rules that go along with consideration. And these would look at specific issues within consideration, like an illusory promise or past consideration. An illusory promise would be when you say, I might give you the $5,000, right? That's not going to be a contract if you don't make a commitment. But so we would go through various topics before we would move on. I'm just trying to give you a general overview and a sense of how the class is run. So after we go through the cases, the next thing we would do is hypotheticals. And I've tried to start it off relatively simple, get more complicated as we go, and have the questions then towards the end mimic the multiple choice questions that you would have on the exam or the essay questions. So let's look at this first hypothetical. This is obviously a contract, right? Everyone looking at this knows it's a contract. So you should intuitively know the answer must be A, it's good consideration. The only thing I would be looking for here would be, can you explain why? Well, of course, right? There are two promises here. You can look at either one as the promisor. Joe is promising to give title to his house to Jane. He's getting the benefit, right, as the promisor, he's getting the benefit of money, 200,000 bucks. It's bargained. Oops, sorry. It's bargained. The only reason Joe is going to convey title is because he wants the money. And the only reason Jane is going to give Joe the money is because she wants the house, right? So that's a simple example of consideration. Number two is a simple example of when there is not consideration. Joe promises his daughter he will buy her a car. Well, there's no consideration here. There's no benefit. Joe is getting no benefit. And there's no detriment. Daughter isn't giving anything up. She's not suffering a loss. She's not paying for it. She's not giving up a right like the nephew and hammer. She's not doing anything, right? So there's not a bargain. There's no benefit or detriment. We don't get that far. Here's where I'm trying to make it a little bit more interesting. And these are the hypotheticals that, of course, we want to get to, that we want to spend more time on, because this is what your essays are more likely to look like, and your more challenging multiple choice questions. So let's look at hypothetical number 3. And the rest of my hypotheticals build off of this fact pattern. So Captain Character performs magic and comedy at children's birthday parties. He's a magician. He goes to little kids' birthday parties. He has a friend named Hillary, and Hillary asks if he would perform at her son's birthday party. Captain Character says, sure, if you email me the details, I will be there. I just ask that you give me a ride. Is that a contract? Is essentially what I'm asking. Is this consideration? Is this a contract? And of course, we have our then multiple choice set up. And this is how I generally set them up. Yes, because, no, because, no, because. So of course, you need to have the right answer, but you need to know the reason why, right? Just having yes or no is not necessarily going to get you the right answer. And so, you think to yourself, is there a contract here? It looks like an informal thing between friends, so you might think intuitively no, but Hammer v. Sidway shows you can't do that, right? You can't just say, well, they're friends or they're family. That can cause, you can have a contract with your friend or your family. So what do we have here? there is captain character making a promise to show up. Is he getting a benefit? Well, I don't really think so. I don't see where he's getting much of a benefit other than the ride, right? Hillary's going to pick him up and take him to the party. So that is a benefit. And, you know, Hillary has a detriment. She has to go drive there and pick him up. Technically, that meets our first element. But of course, there's no contract here because it did not induce captain character to agree to perform. And that is D, right? There's no exchange. Remember, you have to be able to tell that because story. You know, if we go back here, you can't put that hypothetical into the story. Otherwise, you would be saying captain character promises to perform, presumably hours of work, only because he wants Hillary to drive him to the party. That intuitively makes no sense to me, right? No one is going to do hours of work just so they can get a ride to work, right? That's working for free. That doesn't make sense. Instead, so what's the motivation? Charity, right? Helping his friend out, being a good guy, right? That seems to be the motivation. And remember, consideration is all about distinguishing a gift from a deal. And that hypothetical, at least to me, looks an awful lot more like a gift. Even though there is, in a sense, that benefit or detriment, it's a condition on a gift, is what we would call it. The condition is you have to pick him up and drive him to the party. But it's still a gift. It's not really a deal. And of course, you have to be able to distinguish here. It's not because of the lack of a benefit. He's technically getting something. It's because there's no exchange. And then the rest of these are just different iterations on the same theme. So now, instead of having Hillary drive to captain character's house and pick him up, I'm saying, what if he said, Hillary, you need to pay for an Uber to take me to your house. Now I think it's obvious that Hillary is suffering a detriment, right? If we think of captain character as our promisor, he's promising to go to the party and perform. That means Hillary is in the position of the nephew from Hammer v. Sidway, right? Captain character is like the uncle, the promisor. Here, Hillary is suffering a detriment, paying money to have the Uber pick up captain character, like nephew suffered a detriment. But the problem is there's no exchange. It's the same thing, right? From captain character's perspective, it's the same thing. Whether he's riding in the backseat of an Uber or in Hillary's car, I seriously doubt that he is working just so he can get a ride to work. That doesn't make sense to me, right? I don't think anyone would do that. There must be some other motivation. And from this fact pattern, the only thing that would make sense is charity, doing a nice thing for your friend. What about this one? This looks more like a contract, probably, right? Give me money for the gas it will take me to drive there. So now Hillary has to give money to captain character. This looks like a payment for services, right? This looks a lot more like a deal intuitively the first time you see it, but hopefully after looking at hypos 3 and 4, you can see this might not be a contract, even though there's an exchange of money. Because again, it doesn't seem to make sense that he would do the work just to get money for transportation to work. And so what I would do at the end of the unit, I mentioned we would have a practice essay. And so I just converted this to an essay. Sometimes I would have you do these in class. Usually I have them outside of the class, meaning that they're on the course website. There's a model answer built in. You can submit an answer and you can ask me to provide feedback. I would look at it personally if that's something you want me to do. Otherwise, there would be a model answer that you could compare your answer to. And of course, I try to go over most of these in class, not all of them, but most of them. And in doing that, I'm trying to give some instruction on legal writing as well as the doctrine, the law itself. So let's just go through this very quickly. This is how I would write an essay answer to that problem. You would start out by stating the issue or the conclusion, either one. You know, the issue is whether or not there was consideration. I'm starting instead with my conclusion because I already know where I want to go here. I'm saying Hillary's promise is not consideration. I then need to give my rule statement, right? So I'm starting with my issue or conclusion. I'm then giving my rule statement. This is the black letter law from the PowerPoint slides. Its consideration consists of a benefit to the promisor or detriment to the promisee. That's element number one. And number two, bargain for in exchange for the promise. Since those are two different elements, I would want you to apply them differently, separately. And the benefit here or detriment is very simple. The promisee is Hillary. She suffers a detriment because she has to give Captain Character the money. That's all you need to say, right? That's simple. But the bargain is more complicated. You want to spell this out and be as detailed in your explanation as possible. I will often get students start the program by saying, yes, there is consideration, or no, there is not consideration without providing a deep explanation. A big part of what I try to work with students on in the writing is how to expand your application, expand on your answer. Because I get students a lot of times, they know it, but they're not communicating it well to the grader. Okay, so I'm saying it's not bargained for, and it's all has to do with that inducement. Are they performing just because they want what the other party is giving? Is Captain Character performing just because he wants the money? And I'm saying a reasonable observer would not think so. And earlier in the course, we would have covered the perspective of the reasonable observer being the proper perspective, but you can just put that to one side for a moment. And then I do a comparison to the case. You would not need to do this on the final exam. You would not need to do this on the essay portion of the bar exam, but I like to practice with this a bit in class because it is what you need to do on the MPT. On the MPT, you will need to look at cases and make case comparisons just like this. So this is getting you ready for that a little bit as well. So I'm giving my logical explanation. It's not exchange. It's not an exchange. And then I'm trying to use the case to support my analysis, right? So it's distinguishable from hammer. They're similar in that the promisor got no benefit. The uncle didn't get a benefit in hammer. Here, Captain Character is not getting a real benefit. He's just getting gas money. But there's no inducement, right? It's implausible to think he was induced to perform just because of the promise for gas money. Whereas in hammer, no, that made sense. You could imagine a rich uncle promising to give a lot of money to a nephew to stop them from getting into trouble. So these are similar in one respect, but different in the way that matters. And so they should come out differently. And then my conclusion, make sure you always have a clear conclusion at the end, no consideration, no contract. All right, so that's what I have for my presentation. I hope I didn't bore you too much, but if you have any questions about the program, about how I teach the courses, happy to answer questions. I can do that now. You can always email me as well. Thank you.